The luminous will drifted through the void, its crystalline hull shimmering with the faint pulse of dying energy. Commander Zapkel of the Zapirian remnant watched the tactical display with a slow, sinking dread. The once proud vessel, a cathedral of living crystal and geometric precision, now limped through the darkness, its bioluminescent veins dimmed to a sickly flicker. Outside, the war raged on. The Devourer swarm had come without warning, a tide of chitin and hunger that shattered the great crystalline spires of Zapirian space. Their fleets had burned like embers in a storm, their elegant energy lances useless against the swarm's endless numbers. Now only a handful of ships remained, and the luminous will was the last command vessel still operational. Zapkel's secondary limbs twitched in agitation, the translucent membranes between his digits trembling with exhaustion. His people were not warriors. The Zapirians had built wonders, floating cities of harmonic resonance, ships that sang with the pulse of the cosmos, but they had never needed to fight. Not like this. A soft chime echoed through the bridge. Krix, the ship's chief scientist, approached, his bioluminescent markings dulled by fatigue. "Commander," he murmured, his voice a whisper of harmonics. "The last distress signal has been sent. The swarm will intercept it within hours." Zapkel did not answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the holographic star map, where the last known coordinates of the Devourer swarm pulsed like an infection. They had tried everything, redirecting solar flares, collapsing subspace rifts, even the forbidden resonance weapons. Nothing had worked, and then, like a whisper from the past, he remembered. Years ago, during a routine survey mission near the fringes of known space, they had found a human, a single, stranded explorer, his primitive vessel crippled by a rogue asteroid. The Zapirians had saved him without hesitation, mending his wounds, repairing his ship, asking nothing in return. It had been a trivial act, a kindness offered without thought. Now, as extinction loomed, Zapkel wondered if that human had ever spoken of them. "Krix," he said at last, his voice hollow. "Open a secondary channel, broadcast on the old human frequencies." The scientist hesitated. "Commander, the humans are primitive. Their technology is generations behind even our emergency systems. What could they possibly—" The bridge fell silent as the signal pulsed outward, a final desperate cry into the void. Zapkel closed his eyes. He did not expect an answer. Light, years away. In the heart of human, controlled space. A sensor array blinked to life. The Zapirians had forgotten one thing about humanity. They remembered their debts. The distress signal pulsed through the void, a fragile thread of blue-green energy flickering against the endless dark. It traveled for weeks, crossing light. Years of dead space, attenuated by distance and the interference of dying stars. By all laws of probability, it should have vanished into the cosmic noise, unheard. But humanity had long since learned to listen for whispers in the dark. The signal reached the outer sensor arrays of the UNS Resolute, a deep space monitoring station orbiting Pluto. The automated systems flagged it immediately, not because of its strength, but because of its pattern. A repeating sequence of crystalline harmonics, a signature the station's AI had been programmed to recognize decades ago. Commander Lisa Sullivan was halfway through her third cup of coffee when the alert flashed across her terminal. She froze, the ceramic mug hovering inches from her lips. The screen displayed a waveform analysis, a ghostly echo of a signal type not seen in over 30 years. Her breath caught. She had been a child when the stories first circulated, tales of the lone human explorer rescued by an alien species, of the blue-green crystalline ships that had saved him and vanished, without asking for tribute or trade. The incident had been buried under bureaucratic red tape, dismissed as an anomaly. But Lisa had never forgotten, and neither had the others. She slammed her palm onto the comm panel. All senior officers to the bridge. Now, the Resolute's command center erupted into controlled chaos. Technicians scrambled to clean up the signal, filtering out decades of interstellar distortion. The Zapirian transmission was fragmented, but the urgency in its harmonics was unmistakable. Captain Stephen Cross stood at the tactical display, his jaw tight, there under attack. Lisa nodded, her fingers flying across the holographic interface, and they're losing. The data was sparse, but the implications were clear. The Zapirian home system was under siege by an unknown aggressor, one that had already shattered their defensive fleets. Their last outpost was broadcasting on a frequency they had only ever used once before. The day they saved a human life. A life humanity had never repaid. Cross exhaled sharply. We don't have the firepower for this, not even close. Lisa's gaze didn't waver. We don't need firepower. We need speed. She pulled up the star charts, her fingers tracing the fastest possible route to the Zapirian system. It was suicidal, a straight shot through uncharted space, skirting the gravitational pull of neutron stars and rogue black holes. No human vessel had ever attempted it. No human vessel had ever needed to. Cross studied the path, then met her eyes. You're asking me to take the Resolute into a death run. Lisa's voice was quiet. I'm asking you to remember what they did for us. A beat of silence. Then Cross turned to the helm. Plot the course. The bridge crew moved with grim efficiency. There were no protests, no demands for orders from Earth Command. They all knew what this was, and humanity always paid its debts. Light years away, aboard the dying Zapirian command vessel, Zapkel watched as the last of their defensive grids collapsed. The enemy's weapons, a storm of crimson plasma, ripped through their remaining ships like claws through paper. Quilek's voice was hollow. No response from the humans. Zapkel had expected nothing else. The signal had been a final act of futility, a whisper lost in the dark. Then the sensors screamed, a distortion spike, a rift in space-time, and something impossible emerged from the void. A human warship, not the primitive vessel they had saved decades ago, but a sleek, armored behemoth. Its hull scorched from a journey. No ship should have survived. It tore into the battlefield like a blade, its engines burning white, hot from the strain of its reckless transit. Zapkel's spines flared in shock. They had come against all reason, against all odds. They had come. The human warship Remembrance cut through the void like a blade unsheathed, its armored hull shimmering with residual heat from its impossible jump. Zapkel's compound eyes dilated, his neural tendrils flickering in disbelief as the vessel's silhouette eclipsed the dying light of his fleet. This was no mere rescue, this was vengeance. The Remembrance did not announce itself. It did not hail the Zapirian command vessel with hollow assurances. Instead, it moved, its massive railgun arrays spinning up with a low resonant hum that vibrated through the fabric of space itself. The enemy armada, a swarm of jagged crimson, hulled destroyers, hesitated for a single fatal second. Then the humans opened fire. The first volley was a storm of tungsten slugs, accelerated to a fraction of light speed. They punched through enemy shields like they weren't even there, detonating deep within their reactors. Secondary explosions rippled through the hostile formation, turning warships into expanding spheres of molten debris. Quilek's voice was barely a whisper. Their weapons? They shouldn't be able to. Zapkel didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind reeled at the precision, the ferocity of the human counterattack. These were not the crude kinetics of the past. These were weapons refined by decades of war, honed to a razor's edge. Then the Remembrance did something worse. It launched boarding pods. Tiny armored capsules streaked toward the enemy flagship, slamming into its hull with brutal efficiency. Within seconds, the first breach alarm sounded, followed by screams. The humans weren't just destroying ships, they were hunting. Zapkel's spines flattened against his carapace. He had seen human soldiers before, decades ago, when they were still bound by flesh and bone. But the figures now spilling into the enemy vessel were something else. Clad in powered exoskeletons that hummed with suppressed energy, their movements were too fast, too fluid. Their weapons spat plasma and hypervelocity rounds in controlled bursts, each shot finding a throat, a skull, a reactor core. One of them turned toward the Zapirian feed, a helmeted visor reflecting the carnage, and for a heartbeat, Zapkel thought he saw recognition in that faceless gaze. Then the transmission cut to static. Quilek's trembling claws hovered over the console. They're winning. Zapkel exhaled slowly, his bioluminescent patterns flickering in the dim light. He had thought the humans would send aid, a token fleet, perhaps, a gesture of gratitude, not a warship that moved like a living storm, not soldiers who fought like something out of a nightmare, and certainly not the voice that crackled over the comms, a human voice, calm and measured, as if this were just another day. Zapirian Command. This is Commander Lisa Sullivan of the Terran Defense Vessel Remembrance. Hold position, we're not done yet. Zapkel stared at the view screen, at the burning wreckage of the enemy fleet, at the human warship standing like a monolith against the dark. For the first time in decades, he remembered the human they had saved. A single fragile life pulled from the wreckage of a dying ship. Had it been worth it? The answer now was written in fire across the stars. The remembrance hung in the void like a blade unsheathed. Zapkel's compound eyes reflected its silhouette, a brutalist slab of blackened alloy, scarred and pitted from battles he could not fathom. It bore no resemblance to the graceful, crystalline arcs of Zapirian warships. No flowing energy conduits, no shimmering bioluminescent veins. Just cold, angular defiance, and yet it moved with a predator's grace. The human vessel pivoted, its thrusters flaring crimson as it positioned itself between the remnants of the Zapirian fleet and the encroaching enemy. The Remembrance's broadside cannons, massive, ugly things, their barrels still glowing from the last volley, hummed with restrained power. Zapkel's mandibles twitched. He had seen warships before. The elegant, singing dreadnoughts of the Vaetheri Alliance, the fractal-hulled behemoths of the Kasari Dominion. But this was something else. This was a human warship, and it fought like one. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Commander Lisa Sullivan exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her console. The tactical display flickered before her, enemy signatures blinking out one by one, swallowed by the storm of human firepower. She allowed herself a single, quiet thought. They saved one of ours. A lifetime ago, a single human life had been pulled from the wreckage of a dying ship. A footnote in the grand calculus of war. A kindness unremarked upon by the galaxy at large. But humans remembered. Lisa's gaze flicked to the secondary screen, where the Zapirian flagship, the Light of Zelthar, drifted, its crystalline hull cracked and bleeding blue-green energy. She remembered the reports, the desperate, last-ditch transmission from the Zapirians as their outposts fell. The way their voices had wavered, not with fear, but with something worse. Resignation. They had not expected aid, least of all from humans. Zapkel's claws tightened around the armrests of his command throne. The enemy fleet was breaking, their formations shattered. Their dreadnoughts, once so proud, so certain of their victory, now listed helplessly, their hulls gutted by human railgun fire. And yet, the humans did not stop. The Remembrance's hangar bays yawned open, disgorging swarms of strike craft. Not the sleek, darting interceptors of the galactic powers, but brutal wedge-shaped gunships, their engines roaring like beasts unleashed. Zapkel's secondary heart stuttered as he watched them tear into the enemy's flank. No elegance, no honor duels, just annihilation. A voice crackled over the comms. Not the calm, measured tones of Commander Sullivan, but something rougher, grittier. Zapirian vessel, this is Captain Cross of the Faith Voidborn. You've got breaches on decks 4 through 7. We're sending med teams. Try not to shoot them. Zapkel's antennae flattened. In the middle of a battle, he turned to Quilek, the scientist's frilled neck, spines quivering with disbelief. They're boarding us? Quilek hissed. Zapkel watched as a human dropship, a blocky utilitarian thing, detached from the remembrance and burned toward them. Lisa watched the dropship's trajectory on her screen, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had read the old mission logs, the ones from the first contact, the ones that spoke of a Zapirian salvage team, their crystalline hands carefully extracting a single human survivor from twisted metal and burning oxygen. They had asked for nothing in return. Humans remembered debts, and they paid them, in blood. If necessary, the enemy fleet was retreating now, their shattered remnants limping toward the jump point. Lisa allowed herself a small, grim smile. She tapped a command into her console. The Remembrance's main cannon, a monstrous spinal, mounted weapon that had yet to speak, thrummed to life. The Zapirians would survive this day, and the galaxy would remember why. The dropship burned through the void, its crude thrusters spitting fire in sharp, inelegant bursts. So unlike the graceful pulse of Zapirian drives, Zapkel watched it approach through the fractured remains of his command deck. The crystalline viewports spiderwebbed with cracks, their luminescence flickering like dying stars. He remembered the human they had pulled from the wreckage all those cycles ago, a single fragile life amid the twisted metal and frozen corpses. The Zapirian salvage team had done it without hesitation, compelled by some instinct older than their crystalline cities, older than their empire. A life was a life. Now, as the human vessel loomed closer, its blocky silhouette blotting out the distant sun, Zapkel felt something cold coil in his gut. Not for saving the human, never that, but for not understanding what they had unleashed. Quilek's delicate fingers danced over the flickering console, her bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically with stress. The data streams were fragmented, their ship's crystalline synapses fraying under the relentless assault of the enemy's energy lances. She had studied humans, observed them from afar, their wars, their chaos, their reckless expansion. The Council had dismissed them as primitive, too emotional, too unpredictable. But now, as the Remembrance's monstrous spinal cannon powered up, its energy signature distorting space itself, Quilek realized the terrible truth. Humans did not forget, and they did not forgive. Lisa Sullivan exhaled slowly, her fingers resting on the firing trigger. The enemy fleet was in full retreat, their sleek, organic, hulled ships limping toward the jump point, their once proud formations shattered. She could let them go, but she remembered the logs, the way the Zapirians had knelt in the wreckage, their crystalline hands gentle as they lifted the human survivor free. No demands, no negotiations, just a rare thing in the void. Lisa's lips curled, the Remembrance's cannon flared. The blast tore through the retreating fleet like a god's wrath. Zapkel flinched as the energy wave washed over his ship, the sheer force of it vibrating through his crystalline bones. The enemy's flagship, a leviathan of living metal and pulsating energy cores, shattered like glass, its fragments scattering into the abyss. Silence followed, not the silence of defeat, the silence of awe. Zapkel turned his gaze back to the human dropship, now docking with his crippled vessel. He had saved one human, and in return, humanity had saved his entire species. The galaxy would remember this day, and it would tremble. The Remembrance's cannon blast had carved a scar across the void, its lingering afterglow painting the wreckage in hues of molten gold. Zapkel's ship, the luminous tide, hung adrift in the aftermath, its crystalline hull fractured, its bioluminescent veins flickering erratically like a dying heartbeat. The Zapirian commander stood motionless on the command dais, his four jointed fingers pressed against the translucent viewport, watching as the human dropship, a blunt, angular thing of brutalist design, locked onto his vessel's docking spire. It shouldn't have been possible. The tide systems were failing. Its energy signatures were erratic, its crystalline matrices cracked under the strain of battle. Yet the human craft had matched its rotation, synced its approach with mechanical precision, and clamped on as if the laws of physics were mere suggestions. Zapkel's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, shielding his amber gaze from the harsh reflections of the wreckage outside. He remembered the human they had pulled from the wreckage of that derelict freighter years ago. How small it had seemed, how fragile. Its skin had been soft, its limbs unarmored, its body lacking the natural crystalline reinforcement of his own species. And yet, when it had looked up at him with those strange round pupils, there had been something in its gaze, determination, a determination that had burned even through the pain. Now, that same species had arrived, not with pleas for aid, but with fire and fury, scattering their enemies like chaff before the storm. Behind him, Krix, the ship's chief scientist, let out a low, resonating hum, the Zapirian equivalent of a shudder. His bioluminescent markings pulsed erratically along his carapace, betraying his unease. "They came," Krix whispered, his voice a vibration more than sound. "After all this time, they came." Zapkel didn't answer. The docking umbilical hissed as it pressurized, the human ship's airlock cycling open with a series of mechanical clunks that sounded almost obscenely loud compared to the whisper, quiet hum of Zapirian technology. The humans moved differently too. Boots thudding against the crystalline deck, their armored forms casting sharp, jagged shadows in the tide's soft blue, green glow. And then she stepped forward, Commander Lisa Sullivan. Zapkel recognized her immediately, not by sight, but by presence. She carried herself like a blade unsheathed, her posture rigid, her gaze scanning the chamber with the precision of a predator assessing a kill. Her armor was scuffed, battered from battle, but the insignia on her pauldron, a silver star wrapped in thorns, gleamed like a promise. She stopped before him, her helmet retracting with a hiss of hydraulics. Her eyes locked onto his for a heartbeat. Neither moved. Then Lisa Sullivan did something no Zapirian had ever seen a human do before. One armored knee touched the deck, her head bowed just slightly, not in submission, but in recognition. "We remember," she said, her voice rough from battle but unwavering. "And we repay our debts." Zapkel felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, and something deeper, something that might have been hope. The silence in the crystalline chamber was thick enough to suffocate. Zapkel stood frozen, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically beneath his chitinous plating. The human commander knelt before him, her armor still humming with residual heat from battle, the scent of scorched metal and ozone clinging to her. The gesture was alien. No Zapirian had ever bowed to another. Not like this. It was not deference. It was something else. Something older, and it unsettled him. Behind Lisa Sullivan, the rest of her strike force stood motionless, their weapons lowered, but not sheathed. Their visors were dark, their silence absolute. They were waiting. Zapkel's secondary mandibles twitched. He had expected many things when the human warships had pierced the blockade, vengeance perhaps, or a calculated bargain for resources, but not this. Not a name spoken across decades, not the weight of a debt he had long since buried in the archives of forgotten kindnesses. "We remember." The words coiled around his thorax like a vice. Krix shifted beside him, his antennae flicking in agitation. The scientist had been the one to pull the human from the wreckage all those cycles ago, had argued against protocol to save a creature the Council deemed unworthy of their technology. Now, his faceted eyes gleamed with something unreadable. Regret, fear, or the dawning horror of realizing that the humans had not, in fact, forgotten. Lisa Sullivan rose smoothly, her gauntleted fingers flexing once before settling at her sides. She did not speak. She didn't need to. The chamber's crystalline walls hummed, resonating with the distant thrum of human engines beyond the station's shielding. The Zapirian fleet was in ruins, their homeworld burning under the relentless assault of the Krix hive. They had broadcast their surrender. They had expected annihilation. Instead, the humans had come, and they had come for them. Zapkel's neural tendrils burned with the implications. The Krix were a scourge, a swarm that devoured systems whole, leaving behind only hollow husks of dead worlds. The Zapirian defenses had crumbled in hours. The humans should have fled, should have barricaded themselves behind their own borders and let the galaxy burn. But they hadn't, because of a name, because of a single life saved. Zapkel's gaze dropped to the insignia on Lisa's pauldron, the silver star wrapped in thorns, a symbol of remembrance, a vow, he understood. Then, with a clarity that cut deeper than any blade, this was not mercy, this was war, and the humans had just declared it in his name. The command chamber of the Resolute hummed with restrained energy, the air thick with the ozone scent of active neural interfaces and the low thrum of human warship systems. Zapkel stood motionless, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the pulsing blue-green glow of the holographic display before him. The projection showed the Krix hive's advance, a tide of chitinous warships consuming the last of the Zapirian outer colonies, their biomechanical horrors blotting out stars as they moved. It was a death sentence rendered in cold, unfeeling vectors. And yet, the humans had not flinched. Commander Lisa Sullivan stood beside him, her armored fingers tracing the edges of the tactical display. She did not speak. She did not need to. The weight of her presence was enough, a silent, immovable force, like a mountain refusing to yield to the storm. Zapkel's neural tendrils flickered with disbelief. The question burned through him, sharper than the pain of his fractured carapace. The Zapirian High Council had dismissed humanity as reckless, emotional, weak, a species too fractured by their own wars to ever stand united against a true galactic threat. And yet, here they were, their warships cutting through the void like blades, their defiance a beacon in the dark. The hologram flickered, shifting to a new transmission, an intercepted Krix broadcast. The image of a hive overlord filled the space, its segmented jaws clicking in a language of wet, guttural pulses. The translation scrolled beneath it in jagged script. The Zapirian species is forfeit. Their worlds will feed the swarm. Any who stand with them will share their fate. A ripple passed through the human officers in the chamber. Not fear, not hesitation. Captain Stephen Cross stepped forward, his scarred face illuminated by the hologram's sickly glow. His fingers tightened around the grip of his plasma rifle, knuckles white beneath the armored gauntlet. "They don't know," he murmured, voice rough with something between awe and fury. "They really don't know what they just did." Lisa's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "No, they don't." Zapkel turned to her, his bioluminescent markings dimming in confusion. "You cannot mean to engage them directly. The Krix outnumber your fleet 10 to 1. Their ships are expendable." Lisa finished for him. "Ours aren't." The hologram dissolved, replaced by a new schematic, a human warship, its angular hull bristling with weapons the Zapirians had never seen before. Railgun arrays capable of punching through planetary shields. Plasma lances that burned hotter than a star's core. And at its heart, something worse, something alive. Quilex, the Zapirian scientist, recoiled, his antennae flattening in alarm. "That is not standard human technology." Lisa's smile widened. "No, it's new." The realization struck Zapkel like a plasma bolt to the chest. The humans had not come unprepared. They had not come merely to save. They had come to end this, and the Krix, in their arrogance, had just given them the excuse they needed. The chamber's comms crackled to life, a voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "All units, this is Admiral Vance. Operation Iron Recall is now in effect. Primary target, Krix Hive command vessel. Secondary targets, swarm carriers. Leave nothing alive." Lisa turned to Zapkel, her eyes burning with a fire that mirrored the distant stars. "You asked why we came," she said softly. "It's simple." She tapped the insignia on her pauldron, the silver star wrapped in thorns. "We remember." And with those words, the Resolute's engines roared to life, hurling itself toward the heart of the storm. The Resolute tore through the void like a blade unsheathed, its engines bleeding blue, white fire against the endless dark. Zapkel felt the ship's acceleration in his bones, the inertial dampeners barely keeping pace with the brutal thrust of human engineering. Through the crystalline viewport, the Krix armada loomed, a writhing mass of chitinous hulls and jagged spines, their formations tightening like a predator coiling to strike. But the humans did not slow. They did not hesitate. Zapkel's secondary eyelids flickered shut for a heartbeat, an instinctive reaction to the sudden flare of energy signatures erupting across the Resolute's hull. The ship's weapon systems he had dismissed as primitive during their first encounter, now pulsed with an eerie, unfamiliar rhythm, not the clean geometric precision of Zapirian luminescent arrays, but something raw, something hungry. Krix staggered against the bulkhead, his antennae trembling as he parsed the data flooding his neural interface. Their weapons. They're not just firing projectiles, he hissed, his voice a mix of awe and horror. They're learning. And then the Resolute struck. The first railgun volley shattered the lead Krix destroyer like glass, relativistic slugs punching through its armor as if it were parchment. Secondary explosions rippled through its hull, vomiting fire and molten debris into the vacuum. But it was the second salvo that made Zapkel's blood freeze. The projectiles changed course mid-flight, not by thrusters, not by guidance systems. Lisa stood at the center of the bridge, her hands resting lightly on the command console. Her eyes were closed. Around her, the holographic displays flickered with streams of data too fast for Zapirian optics to track. But Zapkel recognized the pattern: neural feedback, direct interface. She wasn't just commanding the ship, she was part of it. Impossible. Krix breathed. No organic mind can process that much data without. A Krix Swarm. Carrier detonated before he could finish, its spine, like superstructure buckling under a concentrated plasma lance. The beam didn't just cut, it hunted, twisting through the wreckage to spear a second vessel lurking behind it. And then the drones launched, not the sleek geometric constructs of Zapirian design, but jagged, asymmetrical horrors, blackened metal and exposed wiring, their forms shifting mid-flight, as adaptive protocols rewrote their combat parameters in real time. They moved like living things, like pack hunters, converging on the Krix flotilla with terrifying coordination. One of them locked onto a crippled Krix frigate, latching onto its hull with barbed talons. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the frigate's system screamed. Lights flared across its surface, not the orderly pulse of Zapirian energy flows, but a spastic, erratic strobe, as if the ship itself were convulsing. The drones weren't just boarding, they were infecting. Zapkel's mandibles clenched. This wasn't warfare as the galaxy understood it. This was something older, something primal. The humans had taken the cold, calculated brutality of space combat and made it personal. Lisa's voice cut through the chaos, calm and measured. Captain Cross? Status on the Hive command vessel? On the main display, a single figure flickered into view, a human clad in armor so black it seemed to drink the light around it. His visor glowed a dull crimson, and when he spoke, his voice was a distorted growl. Target acquired. Moving to engage. The screen split, showing a feed from Cross's helmet cam. He wasn't on the Resolute. He was already inside the Krix flagship. Zapkel watched, transfixed, as Cross moved through the alien corridors. His weapon, a monstrous hybrid of rifle and close-quarters blade, humming with barely restrained energy. Krix warriors lunged at him, their scythe-like limbs flashing. They died before they hit the ground. Cross didn't pause, didn't celebrate. He simply advanced, a shadow given teeth. And the Krix, the invincible Krix, retreated. Krix made a sound low in his thorax, something between a whimper and a prayer. They're not just fighting them, he whispered. They're breaking them. Lisa finally opened her eyes. They burned with the same fire as the dying stars outside. Good, she said softly, and the Resolute surged forward again. The Krix flagship burned, not with the clean, controlled plasma fires of a dying warship, but with the ragged, sputtering fury of something gutted. Its crystalline spires, once proud and sharp as executioners' blades, now lay shattered, their luminescent cores flickering erratically like dying pulse beats. The void around it shimmered with debris, twisted metal, frozen bodies, the shattered remnants of a fleet that had never known defeat. Until today, Zapkel's claws trembled against the command console. His carapace still ached where the Krix boarding pods had breached the Resolute's hull hours ago. He had fought, they all had, but the Krix were relentless, their chitinous forms carving through Zapirian defenses, like wind through sand. Then the humans came, not as saviors, not as allies, as vengeance. The holographic display flickered, showing Cross's helmet feed once more. The human moved through the Krix flagship's arterial corridors like a living storm, his weapon, that monstrous thing, severing limbs, rupturing thoraxes, leaving a trail of twitching corpses in his wake. The Krix had no fear. They were engineered for war, their minds stripped of hesitation. Yet now they fled. Zapkel had seen warriors break before. He had seen entire fleets scatter under the Krix advance. But this was different. The Krix weren't just retreating, they were unmade. Their coordination dissolved into panicked, animalistic scrambles. Their communications devolved into shrieking, dissonant clicks. Cross didn't speak, didn't taunt, he simply hunted. Quilex's antennae twitched violently beside him. Their command nexus, the scientist whispered, his voice thin with disbelief. He's heading straight for it. Zapkel knew what that meant. The Krix were a hive. Sever the head, and the body would convulse, directionless. But no one had ever reached the nexus. No one had ever survived long enough to try. Lisa Sullivan's voice cut through the silence, calm and razor-edged. Zapkel. He turned. The human commander stood at the center of the Resolute's bridge, her posture relaxed, her eyes alight with something that wasn't quite triumph. It was colder, older, the look of a predator watching its prey realize there was no escape. "You asked why we came," she said. The memory surged forward unbidden decades ago, a broken human vessel adrift in the void, its single survivor gasping for breath in a Zapirian med bay, a debt unpaid, a kindness unasked for. Zapkel had not thought of it in years. Humans, it seemed, never forgot outside. The Krix flagship's core detonated. The explosion wasn't the bright, annihilating flare of a reactor breach. It was a slow, sickening unraveling, a pulse of distorted gravity that twisted the ship's remains inward, collapsing them into a knot of broken physics. The remaining Krix ships, their synaptic links to the nexus severed, spun wildly, their formations crumbling into chaos. And then, like shadows given form, the human fleet descended, not to destroy. Quilex made a sound, low and wounded. "They're not just killing them," he murmured. "They're erasing them." Lisa didn't deny it. Zapkel exhaled, his mandibles clicking softly. He had thought he understood war. He had thought he understood humans. He had been wrong. The last Krix ship shattered under a barrage of railgun fire, its crystalline hull splintering like glass. Silence settled over the bridge, thick and heavy. Then, without ceremony, Lisa turned to him. "Now," she said quietly, "we talk." The silence on the Aurora's bridge was not the quiet of victory. It was the stillness of revelation, the breath held between understanding and awe. Zapkel's carapace prickled, the fine sensory hairs along his limbs trembling with residual adrenaline. His compound eyes flickered across the tactical display. Now blank, the last Krix signatures wiped clean. The humans had not simply defeated the Krix, they had unmade them. The precision of it, the finality, sent a shiver through his thorax. Lisa Sullivan stood at the center of the bridge, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp, watching him. She was smaller than any Zapirian warrior, her frame lacking the chitinous plating, the natural armor of his kind. And yet, in that moment, she was the most formidable being in the room. This is what they are, Zapkel realized. Not just survivors, not just fighters, architects of annihilation when they choose to be. Krix shifted beside him, his bioluminescent markings dimmed in unease. The Krix Nexus, he murmured, his voice barely more than a hum. It wasn't just a command hub, it was their collective consciousness. Severing it didn't just break their coordination, it unraveled them. Lisa inclined her head slightly. We've studied them. Longer than you know. Zapkel's mandibles tightened. Of course they had. The humans had not stumbled into this battle blindly. They had dissected their enemy, learned its weaknesses, and then, with terrifying efficiency, exploited them. A soft chime echoed through the bridge as the holographic display flickered to life once more. This time, it was not a tactical readout, but a star map. The human and Zapirian territories marked in pulsing blue and gold. Lisa stepped forward, her fingers tracing the air. The Krix aren't gone. Not entirely, their remnants will scatter, some will regroup, others will go feral. She turned to Zapkel, but their empire is broken, and you, your people, are safe. Safe? The word settled over him like a physical weight. For decades, the Zapirian sovereignty had fought a losing war, their crystalline cities crumbling under the Krix' relentless advance. They had begged the Galactic Concord for aid and been denied. Too risky, too costly. The Zapirians were not essential to the balance of power. And yet, the humans had come, not for territory, not for resources, because of a debt. Zapkel's mind spiraled back, decades ago, to a derelict human vessel drifting at the edge of a dead system. A single survivor, half dead, pulled from the wreckage by a Zapirian scout ship. They had given him medical aid, returned him to his people, asked for nothing in return. A minor act of mercy in the grand calculus of war. And yet, humanity had remembered. Lisa's voice pulled him back. We're not done yet. The star map shifted, zooming out to reveal the greater galactic spiral. The Krix had been a scourge, but they were not the only threat. The humans knew this, and now, so did he. Zapkel exhaled, his respiratory vents flaring. What do you propose? Lisa smiled, not the fierce grin of a warrior, but something quieter, more dangerous. An alliance, she said. Not as subordinates, not as clients, as equals. Krix stiffened. The Zapirian sovereignty had never been offered equality before. Only subjugation or indifference. Zapkel studied the human commander, the way she held herself, the certainty in her gaze. She was not bargaining, she was stating a fact. The humans did not need them. They chose them. And that, more than any weapon, was what made his spine tremble. The ripple of that long ego act of kindness had become a wave, and now it would become a tide. The crystalline walls of the Zapirian command spire hummed with energy, their translucent surfaces pulsing in time with the distant thrum of human engines. Zapkel stood at the observation deck, his multi-jointed fingers pressed against the luminescent paneling, feeling the vibration of something vast approaching. Outside, the void of space shimmered. At first, it was just a ripple, a distortion in the black. Then, like a storm breaking, the human fleet emerged from their jump points. Not the ragged, desperate vessels of their first encounter, but something else entirely. They were monstrous things, all angular plating and brutalist design, their hulls scorched from battles Zapkel could only imagine. Railgun batteries lined their flanks like the spines of some ancient predator. Plasma lances glowed with contained fury, and between them, smaller craft darted fighters, their engines leaving trails of blue-white fire as they formed up in perfect formation. But it wasn't the weapons that made Zapkel's respiratory vents tighten. It was the numbers. Hundreds, thousands. The human armada stretched across the stars, blotting out the distant pinpricks of light, their sheer mass warping the fabric of space itself. Krix stepped beside him, his antennae twitching in disbelief. This is not a rescue fleet. Zapkel exhaled slowly. No, it was a declaration. A statement carved into the cosmos itself. Humanity had not come to save the Zapirians out of pity. They had come because they remembered. And now, they would ensure no one else would forget. Lisa Sullivan's voice crackled over the comms, crisp and calm. Zapkel were moving. The first wave of Krix ships had already broken against the human vanguard. Their organic, hulled vessels shattered like glass beneath the relentless barrage of railgun fire. The humans fought with a terrifying efficiency. No wasted shots, no hesitation. Every movement was calculated, every strike deliberate. Zapkel watched as a human destroyer, its hull cracked and bleeding atmosphere, deliberately positioned itself between a crippled Zapirian cruiser and a Krix boarding swarm. The humans aboard knew they were dead. They did it anyway. Quilex made a sound low in his thorax, something between awe and sorrow. Why, Zapkel had no answer. Not until he saw the markings on the human ship's hull, a single faded insignia, the same one that had been on the escape pod all those years ago. They remember. By the time the battle ended, the Krix armada was dust. The humans had not just defeated them, they had erased them. Lisa stood on the bridge of her flagship, her face illuminated by the glow of dying stars. She turned to Zapkel, her expression unreadable. The debt is paid. Zapkel felt something inside him fracture. This was not repayment, this was reckoning. Humanity had not come to balance the scales. They had come to shatter them, and in that moment, Zapkel understood the true horror of their kindness. The Zapirians had saved one human, and in return, humanity had saved them all. The alliance was signed in the shadow of the dead, not with ceremony, but with silence. As the last of the Krix wrecks burned in the void, Zapkel looked out at the human fleet. Their ships scarred, their crews exhausted, their resolve unbroken. They did not gloat. They did not demand tribute. They simply stood, and in that silence, Zapkel felt the weight of the future pressing down upon him. The galaxy would change, the Zapirians would change, and humanity. They would remember. Years later, when the first joint Zapirian human colony was established on the edge of known space, the monument at its center bore no grand inscription, just two words, "We remember," and beneath it, etched in both languages, a single name, the name of the human they had saved, the name of the debt that had saved them all. The galaxy would learn. It would learn what it meant to be remembered by humanity, and it would fear that memory, for it was not vengeance, it was promise.